Welcome back to the Land Bulletin Podcast, where every other week we bring you experts in the field to impart their knowledge when it comes to the ranch and sporting property market, buying and selling advice, the latest best stewardship practices, as well as topics that impact landowners every day. I'm your host, Haley Murr. Let's jump in. Welcome back to the Land Bulletin. I'm Haley Murr. I'm the host here, and this week's episode is about the intersection of ranching, conservation, and stewardship. We'll go over sustainable ranching practices, land management, and how a community creates a beneficial environment for all. There's a growing need for sustainable practices in ranching and land stewardship, and we're looking to spread awareness with the help from our friends over at Ranch Stewards Alliance. Helping me out today is the founding member and president, Leo Barthelmess, and Martin Townsend, conservation manager over there. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, before we get into kind of the nitty gritty about, what you guys are doing over there at Ranch Stewards Alliance, I'd love to know your backgrounds and, what brought you to RSA. Leo, we'll start with you.
Well, thank you. So my name is Leo Barthelmess. I'm a rancher with my family and president of the Ranch Stewardship Alliance. And we've lived here about 50 years. We're the newcomers in the community. My neighbors have been here 100 years. So the Rancher Stewardship Alliance kind of started out of a need to help guide the changes that were coming to South Phillips County. Some big conservation groups, the Nature Conservancy, bought a ranch and were unfamiliar with them, didn't have any relationship with them. And the Nature Conservancy facilitated meetings, and out of that grew the Rancher Stewardship Alliance. And then we formed a nonprofit, and for some reason, nonprofits change your dynamic in a group. We suddenly nonprofits are equal, where ranchers maybe are about self-inurnment when you're at a meeting. So that's just a perception. So out of those consensus meetings, we formed a Rancher Stewardship Alliance to help guide the changes that came to Phillips County.
Awesome. And has it grown from Phillips County since you guys started it? Or are you guys still kind of keeping your focus on that area specifically?
So we have grant funding to help the ranching, conservation, and urban communities in a 3-county area now. Phillips County is a central point of we're based, Valley County to the east and Blaine County to the west. And if we get requests for assistance other than financial, we've gone to different states and worked with broad-based conservation groups and ag groups across the West. And we have a sister organization, the ACES group down south of Missouri River. They are essentially doing the same thing. We're kind of franchising our program out so that each community could develop their own program that would best fit their needs.
That's great. And Martin, where did you kind of start with RSA and your career path?
Yeah, so in college, I thought it'd be fun to live out of my grandparents' backyard and get a seasonal job with the BLM counting cows. And that turned into, I got a real job with the Sage Grouse Initiative and worked here in Malta with that for a few years. And through that time, volunteered with Rancher Stewardship Alliance and the start of their conservation committee. That then exploded in success off the ground, and it demanded adding a position to it. So a position was created to oversee the RSA conservation position, and I took that job in 2021. So I've been running this program since then.
Well, you guys have great backgrounds that bring a wealth of knowledge to kind of what we're going to be talking about today. Before we get into kind of the programs you guys are working on, Martin, maybe this is geared towards you as the conservation manager, but what is the definition of holistic stewardship as it relates to ranching?
Sure. So holistic stewardship is really like a thought process of how do we do an action and have that action have either a no change or a positive change going forward. How do we use resources while continuing to keep them available and successful going forward? And that doesn't just apply to grass and cows. It can apply to relationships and people and communities and infrastructure and everything that it takes to support a ranch, from grassing cows to vehicles to cars to roads to cities to city pools and everything in between. So I think when we work on holistic stewardship, we try to get past just soil health, just range management, just cow management, and into just ecosystem health of the area. Like these ranches are the center point of the area we work in, but how does that affect the rest of the area that we work in that isn't necessarily on ranch?
And what are the main focuses as it relates to holistic stewardship over at RSA?
So small scale, I guess the two main programs we work in, we're in the Northern Great Plains ecosystem. So we work on a lot of grassland focused conservation actions. So there's a bunch of species of grassland birds that are at risk and suffering population declines. We have a bunch of wide open connected space. So big game migrations has been a big point. So we work a lot in grassland bird habitat focused projects and then big game focused projects. Then as we go kind of up and out from there, we work a lot on ranch business training of we need the ecology to work, but we also need the ranch economics to work. So then our education program then works a ton on ranch succession planning, ranch econ, ranch stockmanship, and different things like that related to ranch management. And then another, I guess, layer to our education program is just trying to work on community at a broader scale. If you're a rancher that's interested in trying something new and different, here's some other people that are doing that too, and just serving as a way for people to meet other people like them that they can bounce questions off of.
And Leo, at your own ranch, since you are a rancher, what of these initiatives have you guys integrated into your own operations?
If I can, I'll give you a little background. I read Alan Savory's Holistic Resource Management in like 1990, 91, and then started attending grazing seminars. And so we've gone from basically a 4-pasture season-long grazing management up to 38 pastures that we use in various stages to increase stock density and increase rest periods on the grass. It's no longer just a cow ranch, it's a soil health ranch, it's a wildlife ranch, and grazing and fire and all of the tools that people use in holistic management are on the table to use in different situations. So we've been supported by RSA and other conservation groups we're one of the first adapters of virtual fence, so we can subdivide the large pastures we already have in existence, because any new infrastructure impedes wildlife migrations, either sage chickens or antelope or mule deer. So we're just working, incrementally as we can. The biggest thing I learned from holistic resource management is more of a decision-making tool than it is a fence-building manual. So we consider everything when we're making decisions. What are the outcomes to wildlife and what are the outcomes to livestock production and soil health? So, we use bits and pieces of many different tools based on our topography and landscape. As every rancher is unique in their infrastructure and where they work. So it's important to address things individually.
Yeah, nothing kind of fits the same mold. Have you seen a lot of success with the virtual fencing that you're doing on your own ranch?
We have seen some success. It's enabled us to change the grazing behavior in the cattle, even when they're not subject to the virtual fence. We're harvesting outlying areas and pastures in the wintertime to knock down that decadent growth, either to graze it or put it into the soil surface and freshen up the landscape, let's say, for mesic type growth and wildlife habitat, because nothing likes to eat old decadent grass. So we're using the virtual fence to address areas that rarely get grazed. And by doing that in the winter, they don't need to trail back to water, which, can be in the summertime, it's too far for them to walk. So yeah, we're having success. It's an emerging technology, so there's always bugs to figure out, but we're having success. Yes.
And in layman's terms, for those listening who might not know what virtual fencing is, without going into those specifics, what is virtual fencing? I know you guys can answer that.
Certainly. Virtual fencing, we attach a collar to our livestock, and then we form virtual boundaries, just lines on a map that are not visible on the landscape. and the caller issues an audible warning and then a physical stimulus if they continue into the barrier. But cattle are actually pretty smart, and they hear the audible, they turn around, come back, and so we're able to subdivide larger pastures and key places of concern that need extra protection or extra grazing. So it's a hugely versatile tool.
And it seems like that's something that's maybe even more approachable to some than building a lot of these fences all the time, monetarily speaking.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the Martin can tell you exactly what it costs to build a new fence, but it's extraordinarily expensive. And virtual fence, once you invest in the hardware, you can build hundreds of miles of fence with virtually no cost.
And Martin, beyond kind of Leo's own experience with his ranch, what are some other projects that you guys are working on in-house that have seen a lot of success with kind of the tools that you guys have provided?
Yeah, so Leo started to mention it, but fencing has been a huge focus that we have here. We have the recorded longest pronghorn migration in North America coming right through the area we work in. So animals being able to move through that space is huge on a wildlife perspective. And then, like you both just mentioned on the cost side, fencing sucks. So it's still so I mean, like an average size ranch that we work with might have anywhere from 150 to 600 miles of fencing just to have the range and pasture management they want. Just to replace what breaks every year is a tens of thousands of dollar investment. So to build more, to build new, is getting harder and harder to justify on the backs of the profit off of cattle. So we really slowed down how much we're working on like cross fence or management fencing. We're trying to do that through other avenues like temporary electric or virtual fencing. And then where we are working on fencing, we're really trying to focus on property boundary fencing and neighbor fencing, basically with the goal of ensuring that as that has to get replaced, it's in our area essentially 100 years old right now, and it was needing to be replaced probably 30 years ago, and cost has prohibited it to that point. We're trying to find those fences and help put them in a way that's friendly for wildlife migration. So with a higher bottom wire, most of our big animals like to go under fencing. So a higher bottom wire, and basically trying to ensure that snow won't rot it and break it, and the animals can pass through it, and that it stays useful for the next 100 years. Because there's probably no scenario where that fence isn't going to continue to be there. Whereas like cross fencing and other things, we could find different management tools. So we've tried to really get into fencing and migration work. The other, I guess, main topics of conservation practice we do are grazing systems. So it's fencing, stock water, making an area grazable. One of the biggest habitat threats and threats to ranching that overlap in our area is just loss of grazing land, whether that's converted to cropland or converted to housing developments or energy developments. Trying to find ways to just keep it in grass so it can be ranched on, and so wildlife have a place to live on it. Basically, the idea is if it's grazable, it's less likely to be converted. So even there might not be anything formally stopping it from going out of production, just the intention of adding the ability that has been greatly successful in grassland staying in place. So we've done a lot of those grazing systems. We actually do a bunch. The Conservation Reserve Program from USDA, CRP, we have a ton of that in our area that circulates and turns over. So we have a huge effort to try to put grazing systems on those acres as they come out of the program to keep them in grass. A fun little like uptick of that is we work with a bunch of bird focus groups that do like abundance surveys of those declining birds. Every time we increase grazing on an acre that's been ungrazed before, it's resulting in an increase in abundance of the bird species being looked at. So a lot of wildlife really relies on managed and used rangelands. So putting the ability in place to do that has been a huge point of our conservation program.
So what is the process if I'm a landowner and I'm listening to this and I'm near kind of in your guys' jurisdiction? What's the process of working with you guys and starting to really create a plan for your property?
Sure. So in our jurisdiction, We operate what we call the conservation committee. So it's made up of around 25 different partners that have something to offer ranchers in the area, whether that's education, project dollars, or anything in between. Basically, the idea with that committee is it meets regularly enough that if a landowner approaches anyone in conservation, they should be able to get into at least a network of referrals that gets them to the right program, the right person, or right support tool that they need to better manage their ranch. In other parts of the world in the West, I think the Natural Resource Conservation Service is always a great place to start. They're honestly one of our main partners. And then like extension service through land-grant universities is another great option to start as well.
That's great. And do you guys have in-house, beyond kind of connecting people with the right people and having these conversations, do you have any really good like templates or best practice kind of things that you can offer landowners?
Really, we try to refer people to people. I think in the agriculture industry, especially, like it goes so much better to provide ranchers and landowners a person to visit with about what they want to do. We're actually struggling in conservation, I think, nationwide. There's so much information that exists, but how has it ever been put out and relayed to people? So government programs, agency programs, nonprofit programs turn over as fast as the people do. So I think being able to put out that information has always been a struggle for us in conservation. So I think just getting a personal connection built between someone in conservation and a rancher is usually our first step to go to.
I would agree with that. I just have an example of that. I received a phone call last week, and this gentleman who I've known for a long time, I've visited with off and on. We live a long ways apart, but he called me up, had the opportunity to buy some property, but it had some annual weed issues and it had some wetland issues, and he called me up to get some information from me. So we talked for an hour, and I found out that he has a great extension agent in his community, and I said, be sure to heavily rely on them, but here are some strategies that I know of and have employed, and some I know of that I haven't employed, but nevertheless, here's some strategies. And it was a lot more engaging and entertaining than reading a book. I've read a lot of books, but it's a little dry. It's a lot more fun to go one-on-one with a peer than it is just to read a book. So yeah, as an example, like as Martin to support what Martin said, people to people is the best tool we have for engaging conservation and production ag.
Yeah, I think the exchange of kind of knowledge between ranchers and conservation groups, that's kind of what we do too. It's like, hey, I have a water issue, or my stream restoration isn't what I wanted. We definitely like connecting them to lawyers or whoever they need to talk to really kind of figure out their plan of attack. That's huge.
Yeah.
And just for my own knowledge, what is the kind of some of the conservation tools up in Montana? I mean, I know Colorado very well from a conservation perspective. But what do you guys kind of have available up in Montana?
So I think working backwards from most extreme to least. Easements have been a popular tool of habitat retention and a powerful business tools for rancher. Long-term program enrollments with USDA have been another option we have. The EQIP program is super popular here. That's basically the NRCS's infrastructure program, so stock water tanks, fencing, that sort of thing. We've had huge growth in some nonprofit programs in the last few years. So in our area, World Wildlife Fund runs a sustainable ranching initiative program, and they've partnered with the beef industry to do some neat things with ranchers with the help of like Burger King and Cargill and some other corporate partners. That has been super useful. Pheasants Forever is, I think, tripled their staff in Montana in the last 10 years. So I think just having more people to work with has been huge. And Pheasants is able to it's kind of act in that conduit avenue as well of providing a person that can direct you to the right agency. Like for the most part, they're working with USDA programs, but they're also not working for USDA, so they can step out and look at other options. Ducks Unlimited is running programs. There's been some other neat things that have popped online, but basically from easements back downwards, we're usually looking at a shorter term agreement with usually a lower total available funding of less options, but less availability, if that makes sense. So that's kind of the programmatic overview. But then the practice overview is so much of what we're doing is just trying to make grazing possible. So I know we had like a new NRCS guy over in Glasgow that was asking us what we can assist with. And I kept telling him if it sounds like it relates to grazing, it's a maybe. And he hated that answer. So really, we're trying to work with landowners to identify gaps in management needs. And from our perspective as the nonprofit in this, like we work with Bureau of Land Management, we work with USDA of like, we can work with their programs, but what's missing? And can we find a way to add that in? So like on stock water, we could figure out how to pay for stock water, but we couldn't figure out how to support temporary electric fencing. So that was an avenue we went down to figure out how to add that availability in planning.
That's awesome. It's good to know, all the different kind of things available to landowners across the West. Are you guys seeing you were saying kind of the transition of taking grazing land and developing it? Are you seeing a lot of that kind of pressure and that change of population growth in kind of the area you guys are in as it relates to maybe diminishing some of the grazing lands that are available?
Where we are hasn't had the same population related development. I think the development that comes for us has been from the energy and food sectors. So we've had a bunch of cropland conversion and we haven't had any energy development yet, but it keeps coming up of let's look at this area.
Right, I'm sure.
And so like we joke sometimes that like our biggest threats to ecosystem conservation are organic markets and alternative energy, which is really fun to say.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's interesting just to know kind of what different pressures other regional kind of ranchers run into because, Colorado, it's very different. The population growth is insane right now, no matter where you live.
Yep.
Could be the Eastern Plains, could be rural communities up in the wet or in the mountains. But it's just interesting to know that would be kind of a unintentional kind of pressure on grazing land.
And it's funny
you would think they'd kind of go hand in hand.
And it's funny how much it changes by location. Like when we just go across the Missouri River to that sister group that Leo mentioned earlier, they have more elk down there and then easier to get elk tags. So they have more land ownership pressure down there. They have more lease pressure for access to land. And then I spent the whole first part of this week down at the southern end of Montana, and down there it's housing. It is housing development left and right. That is the pressure on ranch lands.
And with that, with your sister groups that you're working with, is there an exchange of ideas as it relates to these different kinds of pressures that you guys kind of can come together and figure out?
Oh, for sure. Because, if it's not something we're used to and it happens here, instead of spending 5 years trying to wrap our minds around it, we can just ask someone that's dealt with it, like, what's that been like? And that's been, I think, immensely valuable in both directions. Like we've had input flow both directions from groups in Kansas, New Mexico, Nebraska, Wyoming, Montana, and different ranching communities always have different pressures, but usually like the social model of it is pretty similar. Of there's an outside pressure, ranching has to find a way to respond with limited resources. So it's how do you pull that effort together and get somewhere with it.
And beyond kind of the, tangible net positive outcomes of some of these operational changes that you guys have been implementing on ranches, what are some of the other positive net outcomes from like a social perspective or kind of community perspective?
So I'll take a first run at that, and then Martin, he works a lot closer to it. But because we work with a number of conservation groups in the conservation committee, and we're providing an opportunity for them to engage with us and us with them, we have some really positive social engagement with the conservation community. And they love the landscape, they love to hunt, they love to fish. Maybe they're not 100% engaged in cows, but they can get over that because we're helping them do their work, and I can get over some of their wildlife concerns, and I recognize their concerns. So we're communicating all the time, and we've become partners and friends and talk about family instead of conflict. And we're just engaging a lot of people a lot at the time, and we have far more in common than we don't. So we get over the little stuff.
Yeah. And yeah, we maybe didn't mention it enough, but like our pressure was wildlife, like between endangered species, focuses of black-footed ferrets and sage grouse and different things through the 2000s. That's been the pressure on ranching in our area has been from wildlife. So that's been a huge hurdle for us to overcome from just a perception standpoint of like, no, some of these wildlife groups do have beneficial things to look at. They're not all out to get ranching, which is, I think, the go-to assumption. So, like Leo said, just the integration of those two on paper opposing communities. One story, we have a rancher in the north part of our world that is like the bullseye of the best waterfowl habitat in the lower 48. And he wanted to do a project, and I looked at it for a minute, and I was like, this sounds like a Ducks Unlimited issue. Got our friend Adam from Ducks to come over, tour the place with us, and we came over a hill, and we're looking at this big stockwater reservoir that they use for their main cow water source, and it had 40,000 ducks on it. It had every kind of duck that could exist out there, and Adam and I both hunt ducks, and we're flying through it with binoculars, naming off all the ducks we see. And this rancher looks at us, he goes, boys, hate to admit this, but before today, I didn't know there's more than two kinds of duck. And we're like, well, you are the epicenter of where they're all from. And then got him excited about ducks for the next year. He'd call me every so often. He's like, I saw a duck. It was more brown than it was gray. What kind of duck was that? And so that's been fun to see his interest in ducks, his then now knowledge that Ducks Unlimited supports ranching in some way. And that even turned into Ducks Unlimited was doing a like media coverage of some of the projects they've done. And they brought their journalists and went up and they hunted on that guy's place and brought him with them and tried to get him to hunt ducks. And he called me a week later and told me how boring duck hunting is. But I think he had fun.
But I love those stories. It's when you recognize, oh my gosh, this is what I have. This is what's impacting. Like, how do we figure out how to, like, integrate this into our overall operations as a ranch? It's super impactful. And then from a perspective of what you guys have seen as an outcome since you guys started, like what has been the overarching kind of impact on the communities that you guys live in?
It's been so slow and glacial. It's hard to even recognize change, but we're including more and more inclusive in our community. The town of Malta has lots of hunters, and we introduce people, and we work together with lots of people from conservation groups from out of the county and even out of the state. And it's a way to influence outcomes and support other people's desire for positive outcomes. It's just a big relationship building exercise to where we actually value more people than we had the opportunity to do before. We're pretty isolated. You're a cow guy, you're a horse guy, you're a sheep guy, you farm. We're all living in our silos, and now we live in a big arena, let's say, with a stadium full of participants. And so I
love that.
Yeah, I think we have a long-term BLM guy here that it gave me a great comparison one day. He really felt at the beginning of his career, he was here kind of right at that on-ramp of the area really hadn't had outside focus or outside landowners. Then all of a sudden it did, and in giant numbers. And he kind of put it as the entire area just seemed beaten, of like just down on the ability of ranching to thrive. And I think a huge part of what we try to do is show that ranching isn't just valuable, but has a universal landscape value for more than just agriculture production. Like, it has social value, it has wildlife habitat value, it has broad scale economic value, and that ranchers being open to outside interests and working with and getting out of that isolation and working with those outside focuses gives them the power to make change both on their place and at scale around them.
No, it's neat. I think in general, just kind of the exchange of ideas goes against any type of isolationism that you might be feeling on your properties, because sometimes your neighbors are miles away. So it's nice to have these kind of communal things that bring you all together. And any other good testimonials from people you've worked with? Leo, obviously you're a living, breathing kind of example of where this has kind of impacted you personally, but any other kind of stories you guys want to talk about of ranchers that have been impacted by kind of connecting with you guys?
Well, Martin, especially recently, has got to go to a number of different events, and there's a lot of enthusiasm out there in the arenas that he's talking at. But I've had a couple of comments, not necessarily made by ranchers to me, that I've been in contact with over the past few years, that they speak positively of the extraordinary work that RSA is doing, and the fact that, well, one college professor mentioned to me, he said the whole world has been watching what you guys are doing, and the outcomes are extraordinary. You are, charting a new path for conservation and ranching.
Yeah, and I think outside of like the local projects, I mean, it's always a good feeling to like know that you helped a ranch meet their goal. And I think we've done 150 some of those projects that's really taken off, and then I think we're able to then spread that onto other programs and agencies. So we're increasing that success across our partners. So I think that's been good. I think one of our last, things that we felt really good about was I got kind of panicky a year or two ago and noticed that all of our partner staff, all of our support staff, all of our other agency staff just kind of all of a sudden left. So we're a fairly high turnover area anyways, but we were at like 0. And I looked around and I was like, well, it's not that bad of a thing. Everybody that had been working here and working on this partnership got promoted. So like that's a huge positive. And those people are now out, they're in different areas of the state, different areas of the country. And I think they're bringing forward a very collaborative, very landowner focused energy to the conservation organizations they're working with. So I think that's been a huge success of ours. And then we've touched on it a few times, but I think just the ability to translate ideas to other ranchers, to let them know that yes, it's hard, but it's not unique. Like we went to New Mexico earlier this year, and we were hearing about the problem in their general area of why it doesn't work, and they explained it. We're like, oh, same, it's the same.
Yeah. Did you guys talk to Malpai Borderland Group ever? I know they do some kind of like
years ago,
exchange.
but not this trip.
Yeah.
I don't know if Leo can talk about Malpai.
So when RSA was exploring the art of the possible, I've been told, we went to the Malpai Borderlands group during their annual event and met with them, and there was 5 or 6 of us, spent 3 or 4 days down there meeting the people and figuring out how they did it. And then we also did to other conservation groups like the Blackfoot Challenge and the Nebraska Sandhills Task Force, and to learn how to do this so that we would have some idea where we wanted to go and needed to go. And so Malpai was instrumental in helping us get started. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, it just shows, I mean, I don't want to, I don't want to say the phrase beat a dead horse, but I don't want to, you guys are creating this really cool partnership idea of exchange of ideas. I think that's what's so cool about groups like you guys, Malpai, whomever, is that you are exchanging these things and making kind of the ranching industry in these different communities better and more performative, and making sure these grazing lands don't get changed into these, different types of landscapes that aren't usable anymore for cows.
I mean, we'll steal ideas from anywhere, and we hope people do the same from us. That went so far as our executive director had to travel clear to Arkansas to hear about a technology of electrified cattle guard mats that would make it so electric fencing could operate on public roadways. Had to go clear to Arkansas to learn that they were made just at the other end of Montana.
Well,
so I think
that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's such a good idea.
Yeah. So I think just the idea of like getting out and seeing other ways of doing things, or working with organizations that have access to that kind of information and those contacts, I think is hugely beneficial for ranchers. So I think just being open to what other people do on their ranches, whether as ranchers or what other agencies or groups do with ranches on ranches, of like, look into it. Like, it might not be exactly right for you, but maybe something similar to it is. Maybe it is half of an idea that leads to something more useful. I think one of the most powerful things we ever had was on a tour once, somebody showed us how they hooked up their tanks with radiator hose so it was flexible. And I've seen every ranch that was on that tour buy a bunch of radiator hose since that time.
Well, it just goes to show. I mean, I think ranchers are the most resilient type of people on this planet. They change the way they do things. They kind of absorb kind of information from their neighbors and the people around. But it's neat to have something like you guys to have a one-stop shop for kind of that exchange of ideas. So it's been really good to meet you guys. We've done a couple deals here and there in Montana, and it's just neat to know what's happening kind of in your neck of the woods. And I'm sure as our relationship grows, we'll continue to exchange these ideas as we chat. But I really appreciate you guys taking the time and coming on the Land Bulletin today.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Really
thank you for having me.
appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thanks so much. See you guys next time.
See ya.
Thanks, Haley.
Thanks for joining us today. To learn more about the ranch real estate market or our ranch marketing process, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter on our website at merranchgroup.com or give us a call at 303-623-4545. See you next time.